Hello, hello, welcome back. I'm just going to share my screen in just a moment. Hi, everybody. So it is still a little bit early. We have a couple more minutes to go. I'm still waiting for my co-presenter to arrive as well. So if you want to stand up and do a little stretch, I welcome you to do so. But we will get started in about 4 minutes. Hi, Karen. I think your audio failed to connect. I saw a little X appear. Yeah, Karen, you're still on mute, but oh no, your audio's not working. I know you just unmuted yourself, but it's you may have to reconnect your audio. Sorry, everybody. It wouldn't be a Zoom webinar without technical issues. You want to try maybe navigating to the audio button on Zoom and then clicking the arrow down right next to the microphone. And then you should be able to select a microphone from there. For those who are just joining us, welcome. We're just figuring out some audio connection issues here for Caryn, but we'll get started very shortly. Oh, thanks, Yvette. Zoom just gives us trouble sometimes. Oh, I see. There you go. Yeah, I can hear you.
Let's hear them now. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, thank you. Apparently, my husband disabled the microphone on his profile and didn't realize it would disable it on my profile as well.
Okay, no
So
worries.
it's a new
We got it
laptop,
sorted.
so everything's a mess. Anyway, we're good.
All right, thank you so much. All right, so we can get started. Welcome again, everybody, to SpacesEDU in primary classrooms. I have very special guests with me today to talk about how she's implemented SpacesEDU at her school with primary students specifically. So think of K-3 classrooms. There are some really great creative ways here for implementation. She has really great best practices she's shared with me that I've also shared globally with all of our SpacesEDU educators. And the reason why I wanted to host this session specifically is because I understand that EdTech tools are not a one-size-fits-all solution, right? It depends on so many variables that come into play. So your experience as a primary teacher will differ greatly from your colleagues in the junior, intermediate, or senior divisions, right? Especially when it comes to student involvement. But I don't want that to discourage you from implementing SpacesEDU in your classroom because not only is this a great tool for your students, but it is also a really great tool for yourselves as educators to streamline your practice. So my next guest today is Caryn Swark from Alberta. And to get the most out of this session, I just would like to, hope that you approach it with transparency and an open mind. We'll give you the chance to share how you'd like to improve the use of SpacesEDU in your teaching practices when it comes to that primary classroom setting. And yeah, so without further ado, I'll just want to pass on the mic here to Caryn to introduce herself.
Thank you. So sorry for the technical issues. It's been a day. But thanks. I'm Caryn, as Tatiana said. I'm an associate principal in Lethbridge, Alberta, which, if you are joining us from south of the border, is about 2 hours north of Montana. So I'm not very far away at all. We are coming at it from a very real perspective. We have used Spaces in our school for 3 years now. So we've just cleared that 3-year hurdle. In Canada, being the associate principal still means I teach half time. So I teach French for grades 2 to 6, and I teach health for grades 1 to 6. So I have used Spaces with every grade level. And I've also helped our grade 1, 2, 3 teachers implement it. And I know that using Spaces in grade 1, 2, 3 is a very different perspective than using it in 4, 5, 6. So hopefully some of the things that we've come up with over the last 3 years will be of use to you. My best advice when it comes to doing this, though, is to just give yourself some grace, because it's a learning curve. It does involve, we'll talk on this more later, but it does involve shifting your perspective on assessment as well as just your assessment platform. And don't expect yourself to master it overnight.
No, exactly. So I'm really excited here to get the conversation going. And this is how we'll be spending the next half hour or so together. So we're actually going to launch a little poll in just a minute to get to know your reality and your current assessment practices. And Caryn will touch a little bit on the shift that she referred to just then about how we need to shift our perspective and also our workflows here in the classroom. And we'll also dive into her own school-wide initiatives that she's implemented with Spaces EDU and go through all those implementation ideas and leave room for questions. So let me share a poll. So just being conscious of time. This is a question that I'd like you to keep top of mind is how you're using Spaces EDU in your primary classrooms. Think of all the any challenges or wins that you've encountered with utilization. And if you want to share this in the chat throughout the session, that would be awesome. But just for the sake of time, I'm going to launch the poll here. All right. Okay, we're going to start with understanding everyone's experience with Spaces EDU, where you're coming from. Are you an expert user? Are you brand new to the platform? You should be able to see the poll right now. If it's not visible, please do let me know. All right, I do realize that there were a couple more questions here. But again, for the sake of time, I think we should just answer using the chat. So forgive me if I end the poll right now. Oop. Oh, some answers are coming through. But if you want to, you can answer in the chat as well. So let's start with who is documenting student learning on Spaces EDU? Are you the only person who documents it currently or in the past as you were implementing it in your classroom? So let me know in the chat. Let's see. A for true, B for false. Okay, I'm seeing someone said false. It's not always themselves documenting their students' learning, which is great. Both me and my co-teacher document. So sharing the responsibility and the load is definitely important.
I think another way to phrase that too might have been, is it only teachers documenting learning on
Right.
Spaces?
Yeah. That's the important question. Is it only educators doing it, or are we also empowering students to do it as well? And then the next question here, I'm interested to know your answers to is, do you perform individualized assessment instead of group assessments? A for true or B for false? According to the poll results, it's a 50-50. It's very interesting. All right. I know Caryn and I have spoken about this quite a bit about utilizing group assessments as opposed to on an individual basis. And she'll dive a little bit into this later. And then final question, I am the only person who provides feedback on my students' work. So whether that's Spaces EDU or outside of Spaces EDU, are you the only person that provides feedback to your students when it comes to their progress or their learning? And the answer seems to be false across the board. All right, that's very surprising as well. Thank you so much for your answers. I'll now give the mic back to Caryn to elaborate on the teacher-led versus student-led classroom.
So this is a book that I dove into last year. When we started using Spaces, I was actually doing homeroom teaching. And one of the things that sort of slowly became apparent to me is that when you're doing portfolio based assessment, you have to rethink assessment entirely. And the biggest problems we've had in our district are when teachers are trying to basically transition. I don't know what people are doing before. For us, we were doing report cards before, outcome based report cards. And people were basically trying to transition as if Spaces was just the new report card. So if you think of it that way, it's a lot more work. It's going to be a lot of recording things, it's going to be a lot of comments, and it's going to be time consuming and challenging. So I had some time from our district to dive into some research about assessment to just see like how exactly should we be using these portfolios? What is the best way to leverage them? What is the research telling us about assessment? This book here, The Shift to Student Led, is I cannot recommend this book highly enough. This is an incredibly brief summary of it. But the whole book is brilliant and is full of very useful ideas. So basically, the thesis of this book is that you're spending too much time and energy doing things for students that they are capable of doing themselves. And I can kind of hear the grade one teachers having a collective mental breakdown right now, because every time I say that in my school, my grade one teacher says to me, "You get 26 grade ones to log into Spaces." So I get it. I totally get it. And nobody expects your grade one students to be, doing their own posts and logging into Spaces. We'll talk about that a bit more. But they can do more than we think they can. So the idea is for students to develop into expert learners who share ownership of the learning. Any work you can offload to the students is beneficial. And it's beneficial not just to you in that it saves you time, it's beneficial to students because we all know that the best way to learn something is to teach it. And that when we go through kids' work and find mistakes and figure out how they made those mistakes, we're learning how those kids think. So for them to do that themselves is incredibly useful. It saves time for you, and it leads to rediscovering joy and re-engaging in the profession. So it's just, if this is something you want to dive into more, I highly recommend it. This is a little bit more from that book. And again, this is research based. This is sort of the 4 styles of assessment. So a traditional workflow is what a lot of people are working with. It's where all work is done by the teachers. So, the kids work and you take home the stack of papers and you sit in front of your TV and grade them at night. All of the motivation is extrinsic. It's grades. If you don't, and parents feed into that too. I find, I'll give you $1 for every A, right? And the students miss out on all that valuable learning that comes from analyzing work. So moving on from that, there's 3 types of feedback that we found have been incredibly effective. So peer feedback. Peer feedback can be documented and used. It doesn't have to be only you posting on Spaces. Kids can be posting advice to each other on Spaces. Research actually tells us that peer feedback is more useful than teacher feedback. Of course, there's a but there, and that's that it requires instruction and practice. When and we're all guilty of this, I am too, we say to kids, okay, get a partner and edit their story for them. They don't know how to do that. So the thing about peer feedback, about a lot of this, is that it does require some upfront time investment. You are going to spend a lot of September and probably October teaching kids how to give each other feedback and self-assess. But the trade-off from that is that for the rest of the year, they can do tons of stuff themselves that you don't have to. So formative assessment, and we've all heard of formative summative assessment. So formative assessment is assessment that happens during the learning process. It drives learning and it creates growth. But what's really interesting is they found not when attached to a grade. There was a study done where they provided 3 types of feedback: just comments, just grades, and comments with grades. And the hypothesis was that comments and grades would be the most motivating. It was not. It was just comments. Grades are demotivating because a grade says the learning is over and it's the only thing anyone looks at. And we've all seen parents go down a report card like this. What did you get a D in or whatever, right? So what we want to shift in this book is away from assessing students to assessing with students. The only way to do that is a blended learning model. You have to have your other kids busy. And grade 1, 2, 3 teachers, especially like the really little kids, most of you are already using centers and stuff, so you're halfway there. So when you're doing that, then you can meet with students to assess with them. And then self-assessment, similar to peer feedback. We want students to become more adept at assessing themselves. And someone in the comments said they wished parents would provide feedback, and engagement is tough. 100%. But when students are excited to lead the conversation, parents get more involved. And that's another thing they found in research, is that when kids go home and they're, excited to show their parents what's on their portfolio, parents get more involved. No kid's going to run home and be like, hey, check out my failed math test my teacher posted, right? And I apologize, I'm sort of getting over bronchitis here. So every time I cough when I'm muted, the microphone is like, do you want to unmute? No one can hear you. So these are
Uh,
just a few. Sorry, go ahead,
no,
Tatiana.
no, 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 that's okay. I was just going to hear um, discuss a bit of those strategies that you and I have talked about in our 2 years working together. You've kind of shared what you've done so far and what's been successful. And within the Spaces EDU platform, you've leveraged QR codes for student logins. You mentioned, it might be a bit challenging to get grade ones to log into the platform, but one way to help with this is QR codes so they're able to quickly scan the code and get into the connected easily. And you've also
And we
mentioned,
actually we tape those right on student desks as
there you
well.
go. Yeah, make it accessible. Absolutely. And another great tip you also shared was tech buddies. So having, whether it's students in the classroom who are a bit more tech advanced or having older kids joining and helping younger students get into the platform, understanding the navigation aspect. And uh, recently, you also shared having extra time for primary teachers to prepare for Spaces EDU, which I thought was really beneficial. And if you don't mind just sharing a little bit about that as well.
And of course, that's an admin thing where you have to talk to your admin. But at our school, between myself and the principal, we were able to understand that for our grade 1, 2 teachers in particular, posting on Spaces involves a lot more one on one. You can say to a grade 5 student, okay, now everybody posts this on Spaces. For grade 1, a lot of times you're meeting with them one on one, you're doing more individualized assessment. So, one thing we did is we signed a half an hour a week for our grade 1, 2, 3 teachers as Spaces EDU time, as just time for them to do those extra tasks. Um, and I mean, there wasn't a lot of follow-up from that because it was understood by the older grade teachers that there is a little more work involved at the primary level. But we also were able to assign about an hour a month for all teachers as almost sort of a Spaces catch up time. And that was really useful to our teachers. So, this is something that we just did at our school this year. And I think in really effective. And this again is coming out of that. The first year or two is just struggling. It's like, how do we keep afloat with this? What are we doing with this? Now that we're in a good place with that, we sat down as a staff and we realized that there were 3 areas that students need to be working for Spaces. So technical skills, that's logging into Spaces, making the post, reflection skills, so self-assessment and peer assessment. And what we realized is that if your students are coming in and you're reteaching this stuff every year, that's a big waste of time. So we created this. This is a Spaces continuum of expectations where what is reasonable at our school to have our students do in each of these areas at each grade. So you can see we started with kindergarten, and our feeling was that it's not reasonable for them to do any technical skills in kindergarten. They're not there to do iPads and stuff. We're not doing it. But reflection skills, so we said, for example, filling in a simple self assessment, we do thinking routines. And yeah, I'm sure we can share this out. Tatiana, I believe that you guys have this to share out. If you have not done the thinking routines, we should have it linked somewhere, but they're really great. And our kindergarten teacher uses them quite often. They're excellent self reflection tools. And peer assessment, show and tell. So what we thought of in show and tell is when the kids are doing show and tell, even when we say to them, that's not a question, that's a story, or we're teaching them to ask each other questions. That is peer assessment. We're teaching them that, you're asking questions about what somebody is presenting to you. So those are our kindergarten skills. Then in grade 1, we felt it was reasonable for our students to be able to log in with a buddy's help on an iPad. So they've got those QR codes on their desk. And if the grade 6 students come in or they have a buddy in class, they should be able to log in. We don't expect them to do any more than that in grade 1. Reflection skills, paper and pencil self-reflection. Our teachers do like 3 stars and a wish, or they do like happy face, whatever. It's just that very basic um, introduction to thinking about your own work. Are you happy with your work today or not? And yeah, peer assessment, they do 2 stars and a wish, and they just do it verbally. So again, it's not anything huge. It's just if the grade 2 teacher knows that that's what's happening in grade 1, she knows she can build on it. So in grade 2, log in and navigate the Spaces app solo and upload a photo with help. Explain your thinking. So moving beyond yes and no answers. Did you do a good job? Yes. Why? And keep building on asking good questions. Then in grade 3, we want them to be able to start uploading photos independently and making short posts, either written or video, with some help. We want them to be able to guide their parents through their work using spaces and say and write one sentence of self-reflection, and focusing on respectful interactions for the peer assessment. And then you can see, if we go to the next slide on grade 4, 5, 6, it's really building on that. The one that's in yellow is because the grade 4 teacher and I added that after. We realized that bookmarking, I realized the year that all the grade 4s, to get to Spaces, were going to Google Classroom, finding the posts the teacher made at the beginning of the year, clicking on Spaces. So I showed them how to make a bookmark. So that's one of the things we added. So you can see the 4, 5, 6 is just building on that. And I won't dwell on it because I know this is aimed more at our younger teachers. But the idea is that if we go through this, and our school is a K-6 school, our older students should be in a good position to be able to come in and help the grade 1s with, if they're going to make a post. There's no reason the teacher has to pull every kid out of class and video them responding to, how do you think you did on this assignment? A buddy can do that, and a buddy can post it for them, and you just got 8 hours of your life back. So again, this is a lot of what we have found with Spaces, is that it's about unlearning what you learned in Teachers College. So that's a lot of times when we have these conversations, teachers feel almost attacked. Like, we're working hard. And I mean, I know this. Teachers are working our butts off, and we're working hard, and we're doing our best for our students. And then someone comes in and says, oh no, all of this is wrong. That's not what we're trying to do. But the research changes. A lot of us have changed how we teach literacy because there's new research that tells us to do it a different way. There's new literacy about assessment, new research about assessment as well. So the shifts that we're trying to do are from summative to formative assessment. And this has been such a hard one for me, and I'll tell you a story about it in a moment. We are so ingrained and taught so often that summative is where the feedback happens. But realistically, when kids are getting summative feedback, the unit is over, the activity is over. There's no reason for them to act on that feedback. And we're expecting them to remember it for a year until they come back to that unit in grade 2 or grade 3. From individualized to more group assessments, we want to move towards things that, you can video a group of 3 kids and assess each of the 3 kids. You don't have to do an individual video. We want to move more towards student-led, and we want to move, obviously, if we're using Spaces, more towards digital documentation. You will recognize that none of that is probably what you were taught in Teachers College. So it is a lot of the unlearning process is as big as the learning process when it comes to using something like a portfolio digitally. So I think the next slide is, these are just some examples. So these are real world examples. This is from a teacher at our school who has really embraced Spaces and has done amazing. So what you can see is all she has posted in terms of student work is a picture of a giant number line the student made. So they made giant fraction number lines. And they did this in groups. So 3 kids would have the same picture posted. And then each student, this top part where it says giant fraction number lines, the students wrote that. So again, most of the assessment here, like what did the students learn, is coming from the student. And that's what the most valuable stuff is. Then you can see the teacher comment begins with as a group. So instead of assessing each child, she has assessed each group with a few exceptions. There's always going to be that one kid who did nothing in their group, or that one kid who carried everybody. So yeah, they might have to do an individualized assessment. But here she has given individualized feedback to the group. So they're still getting personalized feedback. And because this is a summative assessment, she's not providing them a whole ton of actionable feedback because she did that during the formative process. The summative feedback should be the least amount of feedback because it's done. There's no acting on it. If you're going to put a grade on it, that's when you do it. And I think the next slide is the story. Maybe not. Maybe it's one after that. I went through this morning, but I just want to make sure that story is in there. Sorry, one sec. I'll just tell you my story now. It'll be easy. So I had a big moment this year where, because I teach grade 4, 5, 6 French, and they were doing plays. And at the end of the year, as we do, I was doing my summative feedback. So I filled out the big rubric for each kid and I had them do their big self assessment and I posted it all to Spaces and I uploaded their videos and it was taking forever. And I thought, what am I doing? It is the end of June. None of them are going to use this feedback. They don't care. They're done. It's summer break. They are not going to look at this and say, "Oh, my teacher said I should work on my pronunciation." They do not care at all. And I had to do 3 classes of 30 some kids all at once. So I had this just moment where I realized I could do this exact same assessment process. I could do grade 4 at the beginning of March, grade 5 at the beginning of April, and grade 6 at the end of April. Give them all this big clump of feedback then, which breaks it up for me. They still have a month because we don't end till the end of June. They still have a month or two to work on it and actually use that feedback. And then all I can do at the end of June is take that exact same rubric I used, have the kids fill in, did you act on any of this feedback, and write 1 or 2 sentences for parents on if they used the feedback and if they improved. So sometimes it's not about changing everything you're doing. And we may hit a slide that says this, I apologize. But it's not about changing everything you're doing. It's just rethinking when you're doing it and when it would be the most useful. So this is another example. This is from one of my health classes where we did Photoshop. And we were talking about, we did a combination. We did some digital citizenship pieces about recognizing that images can be altered. And then we did some fun artwork. So you can see at the top, is it Photoshop or real? There were just 3 simple questions I had because I only get these kids half an hour a week. But there's still some self-assessment. It was, what did you learn from this? What are you proud of? And what would you do differently? And then if you look at my comments, I've posted the video to that we watched to parents. The first paragraph I've written there is copy and pasted to every student. It's just an explanation of what we did. And then I have 3 or 4 sentences of actual personalized feedback for that student. So again, it's not writing 3 paragraphs for every student. And that's really hard because that's where teachers get bogged down is they're like, I'm spending 3 hours writing comments. Please don't. The actual personalized feedback just needs to be a few sentences and more of it should come from students than from you.
All right. Speaking of providing context, I think this is another great example I wanted to share here, and I will like quickly play the sound for you. Hopefully this works.
We're finishing up our number pattern unit soon, and students did an activity where cards were hung around the classroom. They had to go around with their recording sheet and find out what the missing number is for each card. So in doing this, they had to not only determine what the number pattern is, but also find out what the missing number would be. So in this one, for instance, they would decide that this is adding 2 each time, so this number is 13. This is also adding 2 each time, so this number would be 26. It's a little trickier to...
So I'm not going to play the whole video for you, but this is just a great example of how you can use activities here in primary classrooms when providing context to families so they're a bit more engaged to understand what their child is learning. What the educator has done here is they've provided the context through video explaining the lesson, that the lesson was on patterns and what students were expected to do in this activity. And then in the actual activity submission, the teacher also provided the answer key and the student's work, in addition to her own feedback in the post description. So you're not duplicating your efforts here with, as Caryn said, repeating the same thing. You're just copying and pasting it. You already have that context in the activity description that parents can go back to and refer to get more context. And what they've also done is they've provided the curriculum connection here, making it clear what the learning outcome was. And they've also gone ahead and assessed it here on the proficiency scale so that the families would know how the students did, check in on their understanding, and would also just make it visible for the educator as well.
And quite often I don't tag proficiencies on mine, but what I do is attach a rubric that has the proficiencies. I don't grade them. I've moved entirely away from grading, which I know that's not an option for everybody. They've let me. So my rubric right now has the objective in the middle and on the left, what to work on, and in the right, what you're doing well. And that's all I have for it. One other thing with videos that I've emphasize to my grade 1 teacher especially, the grade 1 teachers spend so much time sitting one-on-one with students, having them read to them and things. Video it. If you're doing that anyway, pop up a camera and then you can post that video. And then you can turn to the camera right after the kid finishes reading and say, as you can see, little Sammy is reading very well. Should keep working on these words. And there you go. There's your assessment. That's all you have to post. It doesn't have to be written. And that's another big thing that's hard to get through our heads because we've always written it. It doesn't have to be written. This is something that I did. This is precision reading, if anyone's done it. And again, this was very simple, but showing progress is such a cool thing that we can do on Spaces. So I did some pullouts for precision reading this year. And all I do is at the first time I read with them, I record it. And then we continue reading every day. And there's like an explanation in here of what we did. And then the last time I read with them, I record it again. And all that I actually post that video, I create a post when I take that first video as a draft. And then when I've done that second video, I just go and edit that same draft, add the second video, add a picture of the 2 sheets that we used. And I add a bit of commentary, but really the 2 videos are self-explanatory. I don't know if you can play them just for, like a couple seconds of each. But as a parent, seeing these 2 videos is pretty powerful.
I am the best, said Kangaroo. I am better, said Bear. I can make a mean face.
I think that was the initial video, if I'm not mistaken, and this is the most recent.
I am the best, said Kangaroo. I am better, said Bear. I can't make.
And without watching the whole video, you don't see the quite as much dramatic, but she read the entire double-sided sheet in the second video, and in the first one, she only read up to "I can catch more fish," said Bear, and that's how much they can read in 1 minute. So that really says more than I ever could. I could write 3 paragraphs, and it would not say as much as these 2 quick little videos that were so easy. And I do just use my cell phone. I know some people don't like to do that, but for me, it's just so quick and easy to just have my cell phone. And quite often, what I do too, because I don't want them to be self-conscious, I use my cell phone as the timer. So anytime I'm reading with them, I just have my cell phone like this for the timer. And then the time when I do the final recording, I don't tell them that I'm taking it because as soon as I do, they get nervous. So,
Clever.
and the kids love to see this too, incidentally. As soon as I do that second video, they're like, can I see the first one? They're very excited to see their progress.
I am.
All right. So what you'll notice here is a common thread of these examples that we're really emphasizing quality over quantity, right? Many educators have asked me, Tatiana, how frequently should I be posting on SpacesEDU? I don't have enough. There's not enough hours in a day to do that. But to answer that, let's just break down the school year. What are some pivotal moments? You can align your documentation with those critical times throughout the year. So this could mean documenting term by term, or if you have the capacity at the beginning and end of each month, just as an example. So by really determining these important dates, you're able to truly showcase student growth. So just as the example that Caryn provided, we have that visual aspect to growth. We're able to document how the students started with reading, precision reading, and how it ended, and we can clearly see that growth as well. So I always stress to teachers, regardless of their division, do not document every single thing. That is not the point. We are trying to avoid that scrapbook effect, as I like to call it. Did you want
If
to
it's
add to
something,
that too?
sorry, Tatiana, yeah, I just wanted to jump in. We always say if it's something you could send home, don't put it on Spaces.
There you go.
So we
Yeah.
don't want to be scanning tests and worksheets. You can just send that home. But a child reflecting on their test is much more useful. The other thing I know with that whole how many times should I post, in our district, that was mandated to us. They said you have to have 1 math, 1 literacy, and 1 other post every month. one of my best pieces of advice for that is to look more and more for times you can do both. So I had my students write little books explaining a math concept. Bam, that's my language arts post, that's my math post. We're so used to segregating subjects that we don't think of it that way, but always look for, can I make this cover more than one subject area? If your students are doing a social studies project, can you assess their writing at the same time? Can you assess their ability to read the story? Can you make the story about something in science and then ask them a question about the science? Now you're assessing multiple things in a single post, and that's a huge time saver as well.
No, absolutely. Cross-curricular assessment. That's the beauty of SpacesEDU as well. You can do all of that in the platform. But as I mentioned, documentation doesn't have to be that frequent, but the goal is to make it meaningful. So how do we do that? We showcase how students are progressing toward their understanding and mastery of learning outcomes. So each post should include, as you've seen today, a learning artifact or more than one, where you have the ability to upload up to 10 media files for each post, a student reflection, whether that's self-assessment or just the student reflecting on their learning, clear learning objectives, and descriptive feedback, whether that's from yourselves as the educator or even peer feedback would be great to include here as well. And if you are going to use SpacesEDU for assessment purposes, you can attach that proficiency level, or as Caryn mentioned, you can also attach a rubric to the post. But remember, not every assessment in SpacesEDU requires evidence of learning. So that's where our new feature comes in, which is the growth book. It actually allows you to record steps along the learning journey without the need to attach a learning artifact every single time. So this will be your go-to tool for rapid assessment on the fly this school year. You can find the growth book in your assessment tab. My colleague Lisa will actually be diving into this in her session with Stephanie Carpenter on competency-based assessment, which is right after this one. So if you want to check that out, remember to sign up and you can join in on the conversation.
And just to follow up on something Tatiana said, she said not every assessment needs an artifact. I would also say not every artifact needs an assessment. Like, it's great to get kids to take ownership, and if there's something they're proud of and they want to put it in their portfolio to show their parents, that's awesome. You don't have to comment on it every time.
Yeah, that's another great call out. Yeah, it works both ways. It's very true. So what I would love us to do now is to kind of reflect our own implementation journeys, if you will, with SpacesEDU in our primary classrooms. Are there specific areas you're looking to improve just now having attended this session today? Please let us know in the chat. What would you like to improve in your SpacesEDU workflows? Whether that means offloading to students like Caryn mentioned, or shifting your perspective, just like the student-led book suggests.
And I think just remembering, again, baby steps. Like, pick something small and make it your goal for the year. Don't try to do everything all at once, because that's when we burn out.
Absolutely. I think we can adopt that SpacesEDU continuum slide to our own practices. That would be a great way to kind of scaffold it or make it a bit more digestible. Yeah, Yvette really likes the continuum of expectations as well. Nice way to get started as a staff or team. And if you have any other things you'd like to share, please do so in the chat, especially how you plan on shifting your teaching workflow. What is one shift you'd like to explore this school year? That would be lovely.
Jillian, one thing and that's a really, really common thing, is wrapping my head around posting various items with younger students and limited tech devices. Yep, 100%. Sometimes what can work with that is, if your students are working in centers and stuff, just walking around and videoing them in their centers. And then you can post. That's another thing to remember, is that we don't have to post the same thing to every kid. If you post one kid working at the Alphabet Center, you don't have to post everybody else working at the Alphabet Center. It can be something else. It's still literacy assessment, and it's still that sort of thing. Not using your personal phones, they're making it difficult on you, then that's hard. But if you have even one device in your classroom, you can do that. The other thing is, and this is where I really recommend that book again, if you can do some blended learning. So if the majority of your students are engaged in centers and activities, that frees you up to meet with small groups and record that and do that sort of do those videos. And like I said, because so much assessment is verbal in primary years, record it. Don't feel that you have to write everything down, because if you're doing it already, there's no point in you now going back and retyping all of your notes to post it. I don't know if that helps at all, but I know that is a challenge.
Jillian asked a really great question here. Would you
Absolutely.
recommend? Yep.
I think either way can work. If you choose the first way, then you're sure to be organized. If you do it the second way, you just need to have a checklist and make sure that you're getting everyone. I actually like the second way because sometimes something cool is happening and I want to catch it. Um, I caught a really cool conversation between some kids using the Makey Makey, where again, I just have my device on me and the kids were having a conversation about, well, why isn't this working? And I was about to explain it to them and I just flipped on my phone and I wasn't even looking at what I was recording. I was lucky I even got them. But we were talking through it and there was such a cool moment where the one kid made it work and went, and that's what I got to put on Spaces, is that moment of discovery, which was so cool. And it was nice to be able to capture that sort of spontaneous moment and show the parents what we were doing.
Thank you, everyone, for all your lovely questions and for attending today's session. I'm just being, mindful of the time here. The next session is starting in 2 minutes, but I don't want the conversation to stop here. If you have further questions that come to mind, please feel free to send me an email once you receive that follow-up, and we can keep that conversation going. But I would like to thank you again for joining our session. Thank you to Caryn for sharing her expertise. And I wish you all a really great day, or I'll see you in the next session. Bye, everybody.